Welcome back, everyone, to episode 7 of the Empowering Growth Project. I'm Alex, and I'm here today with my co-hosts, Lisa, John, and Bear. And we have a very special episode for you today. We're here with Gary Foster, who is a very good friend of mine, and he's going to share with us what he knows on the topics of neuroplasticity, overcoming trauma, and healing the brain. These are topics that I've been pretty much obsessed with, and Gary was kind enough to agree to share with us some of what he knows. So Gary, welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Hi, everybody.
Hey,
nice to see
Gary.
you.
Great to see
Thanks.
you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It means a lot.
It's great to have you here with us today, Gary. I want to know, from your perspective, is it possible to actually heal trauma, heal the brain from trauma? We hear so often time heals all wounds, but to some extent, I don't believe that that's fully true. But from your perspective, how can someone start to heal from difficult memories or situations?
What I've learned, and it's been my experience, because everybody in life, whether they recognize it or how bad it is, goes through trauma, some type of trauma. And the very first part of healing trauma, and it, in some cases, depending on what it is, as time goes by, trauma is always there. The brain never forgets trauma, and it never will forget trauma, but you can overcome that and be on the end of where you don't have to really accept the fact that you have to deal with that like you have always dealt with it. Most people have tried to bury it. They try to put on stuff on top of it. But the very first thing that people have to recognize is the realization that they have gone through trauma is the very first step to healing trauma. So you need to recognize that there is an issue. And then once you recognize that, then the biggest, and I think the most important thing to the healing process is accepting that, yes, this is what has actually happened to me and myself and my person and my spirit. Whenever it had happened, whether it was a week ago, a month ago, 10 years ago, you have to accept that and take that as your own and say, okay, this really did happen to me. Now, what do I need to do to heal myself or step forward? And what I found was because me being me, and what happened in my life, I started to heal myself through research and study. And I was basically because just of who I am again, and everyone's different. Some people will seek help from professionals. Some people will, seek help from family and friends and whoever. But as for myself, I just dove into study and research, and I took a couple courses to basically understand myself, because my background is, and as some of you know, and Lisa, I don't know if you know, I was a contractor my whole life. That's what I did. I built houses. I was born and raised in the country, and that's just what I did. But I, like everyone else, had trauma, and a lot of it. And I had an incident that happened to me 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. It was a near-death experience. But what brought the whole thing to surface, even before that or after that, was, and I just shared this last one with a good friend of mine. I was at my daughter's, and this was just 2 years ago. I was at my daughter's after the near-death experience, and what I tried to do after my experience was I tried to bury it, because even being born and raised a Catholic and a Christian and accepting all that, as I have found out since then, even though it happened to me, I still didn't believe it. So what I did was, being a big, rough, tough, country boy carpenter, I tried to bury it. And that was a mistake, as I found out 3.5, 4 years later after that. But 2 years ago, I was at my daughter's, and I went up there for a weekend, and I was visiting her and her fiance, and it was Rex and I, as all I have a dog, Rex. And so I was, to lead up to that, for the month or two before that, I was I was hearing from people because I was staying down the shore, working down the shore. And the guys who I was staying with, they would ask me, what the hell's going on with you? Because at nighttime, I was just dreaming, but I wasn't remembering any of it. I was fighting, I was screaming, I was yelling, I was crying, I was going through all kind of stuff. And what I found out was that was all the past trauma was coming back. And I was growing up, I've been able to compartmentalize most of the trauma. But as most people find out in life, and I said this earlier, the brain never forgets a thing. You can bury it, you can try to bury it all you want to bury it. And eventually, and I don't care, the most hardened people in this country, in this world, eventually it's going to come out in one way or another, whether it's physical, whether it's mental. And what happened to me, it started coming out in mental, and it started coming out in bad dreams and night tremors and night terrors. And I'd wake up and I didn't remember anything. And it was people telling me that it was going on. And the weekend I woke up to my daughters, and same thing happened on a Friday night. They were like, what the heck's going on? You're keeping everybody awake. And I'm like, well, I don't remember a thing. So Saturday night, it was 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and I took the dog out to go out for a walk before I went to bed. And I walked outside the door, and the minute I walked outside the door, this will get emotional for me, so please forgive me. I walked outside the door and I had no idea who I was. I didn't have any idea where I was. I didn't know. I had no idea who Rex was. Everything was gone. My memory was gone. I had no clue at all. And I'm just standing there, and all of a sudden I started looking around and I realized that I didn't know what I was. I didn't know who I was. And a guy came out of her apartment building, and there was 4 entrances to her condo building. And that morning he had seen me come in or walking with the dog, but he could see in my face there was something wrong. And he said, he goes, he didn't know my name, but he goes, what's wrong? He goes, something's wrong. And I'm like, I don't know who I am. And I said, I have no idea where I said, I know I walked out of this building, but I don't know where I am. I have no idea who I am. I don't have any idea how I got this dog at all. And he goes, look, I think I saw you today to come around. You came in the bottom entrance of the building. He goes, let's walk around there. And just like that, I started running to the back of the building, which I had no idea where the back of the building was, besides he pointed. So as I'm running around to the back of the building with the dog in my arms now, because I picked him up, and again, I didn't know who he was. And as I'm coming to the back entrance of the building, my daughter's walking out. And as she's walking out, she says, hey, Dad, and I didn't know who she was. I had no idea who she was. Nothing. And she could see in my face that there was something wrong. And she screamed at me. She said, Dad. And just like that, I was back. Everything was just like, I just walked out the door. It was like, here's Rex. I'm like, oh, I just took the dog for a walk. And it was at that point, after the 3.5 years of burying the near-death experience, and then going through all the trauma, and there's a whole other side to this whole story, but that's when I realized that there was trauma that I had in my life that I had my whole life I had buried. And I share it in some of my posts. There's trauma that's and I had good parents. I had a great family upbringing. But there was trauma all through my life, and whether it was watching people die or watching a friend get just all kind of stuff. But I buried it. I always had the ability to bury it. And it was that point in time where I realized that I recognized that I had an issue, and it took it all the way to where I did not have any idea who I was, where I was, who my daughter was, who my dog was. That's at the point where I realized that there was something wrong. And that night I went in, I didn't go to sleep. I laid there. And I basically said, okay, I'm accepting the fact that I have things that I needed to get taken care of. And when I came home the following week, I got on the phone and got in touch with someone. And, they said, well, you're ready now. And I'm like, ready for what? Well, because now you recognize the fact that, there's something that you need to be healed. And and you need to heal it. So that's when I started diving into the courses and figuring out stuff for myself. So yeah, yes, trauma can be healed, but you need to recognize that you have issues in trauma, and then you need to accept that. And with that acceptance, then you can start the healing process. So, if you want to go from there, ask questions, then feel free. So.
Absolutely. So what are some of the things or modalities, techniques that helped you when you were starting your healing journey after you got to the point where you could now accept that what happened to you was traumatic and you got past that hiding
Trauma, that past that trauma.
Yeah.
Well, what I did was I went, because again, me being me and always being very independent and want to fix things myself. That was just where I was raised. It's like, if there's an issue, and you're out in the middle of the country, you have what you have, you fix it. If you're by yourself, you try and fix it. So I just related it to me. It was my issue, was my situation. So one of the biggest things that I did and what I started to do was I took the course, Neuroplasticity course. It was Ultimate Success Masterclass, and with that you learn techniques. And one of the very first things after you accept it is you have to realize that you need to write down. One of the biggest things for me was writing down, going back through my whole life and writing down, everything that I could remember. And what the unique thing was for me was, once I had that, like, if you want to call it a mental break, which is basically what I had, a mental break. And then I had to come back from that. And how that happened was my daughter was screaming at me. But I went from totally not knowing anything to being back. And then I started going back all the way back to when I was a little kid, and it started basically when I was 13 years old. Even before that, I had trauma, but when I was 13 years old, and I just wrote down every single thing, major trauma point in my life that that I could remember. And the other thing is when you write those down, the biggest thing is the feeling that you have when you write that down. You basically you have to go back, and it's no different than if you were to go to psychologists or psychiatrist, and they would lay you down and they'd ask you, what about this and about that, and then, well, how do you feel about this? But I did it all myself, and I don't recommend that, because there's other people that will help you to get. I mean, it took me 3.5 years, 4 years to accept that I had a near-death experience, and then that case with my daughter. But I did it myself. There's people that can help you get there quicker, and but the steps are that you need to write all that down. The steps are feeling and recognizing all the emotions, or the feelings, not so much emotion, but really the feelings, the gut feelings. Because when we have trauma, whether you're in shock or you're not in shock, depending on the trauma, there's always a feeling that you have. So you write down those feelings with each trauma that you have, and you list them out on a piece of paper, and then you have to go back over it. You have to basically relive that thing so you can release that out of your spirit, out of your body. And, and that's a whole different thing in itself. But
do you think that a lot of people avoid dealing with trauma or painful experiences because of feeling that pain again and going back to that memory?
Most definitely. That's the biggest reason why people don't want to go to that's why people get stuck in the world, because they have trauma and they realize that either that or they just keep reliving the same trauma. They just keep diving themselves back into that same situation because they're trying to fix, their psyche's trying to fix something. And so if they put themselves back in there, maybe inside themselves, they said, oh, well, maybe I can fix it this time. Well, it never happens, because they're not recognizing that they have a problem, and or accepting the fact that it's a problem and that they need help to get it fixed. And here's the thing, that it's tough, because I consider myself, and I'm different. Most people would seek help. Most people would go to a doctor, a psychiatrist, but again, because of how I am and how I was raised, I figured, and Gary's not an idiot. You go do information and you study and you learn things and, if I got stuck on something, I would enlist the help of someone who was knowledgeable in that field to overcome that. But I wanted to do it myself because I've always been the type of person, and that I learned more valuable lessons by doing it myself and then going through the hardness of that, as opposed to someone helping me and trying to make it easier for me. And I've always been that way. That's just the way I learn better. That's the way I retain things more. And that's the way that it makes it emotional for me. If I was to sit down with a psychiatrist, because I was invited to sit down, and I shared this with Alex, I talked to a gentleman who was well versed in trauma and PTSD, which is eventually what I was diagnosed with. And I don't like labels. It's just, to me, it's a gift, because all that trauma that I went through got me where I am. Right. So as long as you accept that trauma and you learn how to deal with it, then that's a plus to me. And again, this is me. This is not everybody. Not everybody's the same. Not everybody learns the same. Not everybody heals the same. But basically, the steps to heal yourself are all the same. You need to recognize it, and then you need to accept it, that it's your issue and it's your trauma. And then you need to relive that trauma. You need to bring that into your life so you can recognize and realize those feelings that you had at that point in time. And then as you make those lists and as you write those feelings down, as you relive that trauma, then you're able to, the next part is being able to release that. And release comes in all different, I'm guilty of it. It happened to me last week where who knows what started, but I just started crying. I was crying for 15 minutes. Rex was up in my face, and it was, all it is a release of stuff that, the stuff that's happened in the past. And that's good, because what it does is it opens you up. It opens your soul up for the good stuff to come in. So, again, not everybody's the same. The way I learned, the best way for me to learn this was to go through it and do it myself. And again, I enlisted the help of professionals and other people before I became certified in it to help me through certain things, because I got to certain points and I would read something or I'd study something and I'd be like, well, okay, that's okay, but that's not where I'm at. So then I had to bring somebody else in, and they were like, well, yeah, not everybody's the way it is here. And so when I needed it, I enlisted to help other people. When I didn't, I went full bore so I could relive it and face that. I don't want to say fear, because as you all know, and I've shared with, Alex and John and in my post, I don't have a fear button. I never have had a fear button. So, facing that, I just changed that into more of an excitement thing, an adrenaline rush kind of thing than I do fear, because fear's a negative emotion. I don't deal with that. So, I pushed forward. I got certified in the neuroplasticity, and again, it's to recognize acceptance, write the stuff down, write the feelings down. You have to relive all that stuff, and at some point, whether it's as you're writing all that down or whether once you go through those steps, as you're writing it down and wanting to let it all go, whether the release is emotional, which it'll get emotional because you're going to drag up all that stuff, and people don't want to relive that. Most people don't want to go back to that kind of stuff, but once you accept the fact that you need to be healed, then it's easy to go back, and it's hard to release it, it's hard to face it, but it's the only way people are going to heal. Okay, so time.
Gary, can I interrupt for just a second? You actually, so you said the first step was to recognize, and then the second step was what again?
Accepting the fact that you
accept. Perfect. And then you said write it down.
Yeah, you have to write it. Everything you got to write. You have to sit down, and it's a process. I mean, it's a process. You have to, here's the thing is once you recognize the fact that that there's trauma because most people have trauma and they'll just, keep on pushing through in life. If I keep pushing through in life, and like Alex said at the beginning, time heals all things. Well, no, it doesn't, especially hardcore trauma. It just, John, you have been through stuff like I've been through. And until you recognize that and accept the fact that I gotta let this stuff go, or you're just gonna get stuck in it. You just get stuck. You can't, no matter what you do, no matter what you try to do, no matter how far you try to push forward, it's just gonna come back.
Right.
No matter how it manifests, no matter whether it manifests, no matter how it manifests, it's coming back. You can't people can't hold negative energy inside of them before you're either going to become evil or you're going to let it go and you're going to move forward positive.
Right.
That's your options.
What was the step after writing it down?
Is writing down the emotions that or the feelings that you had at that moment of trauma, and then slightly thereafter, because when you say you're in a car accident and you say you have a brother and your brother passes away in the car accident, so you're at the car accident, your brother's laying there and he's dead. There's one feeling that you have right then, and most of the time it's shock and disbelief, but then there's feelings that are come along after that.
Right.
A week after, 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after. And those are the things that you need to write down with that traumatic experience. Because if you don't.
And then after writing down that emotion and that feeling, there was another R after that. What was that one?
As far as release.
Release. There we go.
Yeah.
No, and so I spent 12 years in the Army, and the Army is all about acronyms, right? And so I'm like, okay. As I'm listening to you, I'm like, okay, recognize, that's an R, accept, that's an A, write it down, that's a W, write down the emotion and the feeling, another W, and then R, release. That acronym is literally RAWWR, RAR. And the cool thing about that, and the cool thing about
you're releasing. That's a release.
Releasing as you're letting out that RAR. So anyway, sorry, I know I
no. That's
I love that. I love it.
I do the same thing, Bear. I'm the same way. If I don't have to remember a whole bunch of stuff and I can do it with a couple letters, and makes me simple,
awesome.
Makes awesome. It easy. I share this with Alex. Alex and I have become very close over the last couple of months, and I share this all the time. Gary, the way Gary looks at things is, you come to a situation and there's only, whether it's trauma or whatever it is, there's only so many options. You're a military man, Bear. You work in options. Okay, I got option A, B, C, D. You take everything into consideration. Who's here? What's here? What tools do I have to implement? And then you make a decision based on what you have around you. And then, and considering the people, because that's the number one thing is the people. And once you make that decision and that option, the best you can make it, then you live with it. But I'm the same way. And the military is good for this too. Acronyms. It's like everything is SecNav, and everything is abbreviated. And it makes it easier. I think it makes it that guys are a little bit more acceptable of that, and they can work with that better, because it makes it very to the point and concise and precise, and this is the way it is, and this is what you need to learn, and you can go on from there. So yes, and you said the RAR, and that's absolutely right. I mean, and Alex and I shared this the other night. When you have to release that negative energy has got to be released somehow, whether it's screaming or whether it's beating something up, beating a punching bag up, whatever it is. You got to let the negative go. It's got to go before you can move forward. And you said it at the beginning, Alex, is time heals all wounds, and it doesn't heal wounds. It does not. Absolutely not. Time can soften the edges on trauma and wounds, but as far as healing wounds, you got to deal with it. At some point in your life, you got to deal with that situation. So yeah.
I wanted to interject a little bit. I love that you talked about journaling, because I would say that is, on top of being a habit that I do on a daily basis, that is also something that, whether it's my coaches or along, whether it is the trauma you're overcoming, the actual journaling and doing that as a practice, as a process, is so critical. And it doesn't matter if you're going to go to the psychiatrist, any coach, anybody, they're going to have you. That's going to be number one, is they're going to be like, okay, so write it down. And I think that it's also super important to understand that, like, when you have a loss or you have a trauma, you're going to have the phases, right? So when you're talking about going through those different phases of it, to be able to write that down and identify it. And by writing it down, it's cathartic. It does start the release process. It helps you actually identify what it is you're feeling, because you might have, anger, but maybe the anger is actually a worry, or you have these different things. And so by writing it down, you can actually like start to process and start to understand. So I think that that's like number critical. Like, I love that you talked about that and use that as a way to help you deal with it. I also like the idea of the learning mindset, right? Okay, so I realize I've got this problem. Now I'm going to learn. I'm going to go figure out what's going on with the brain. I'm going to figure out how I can solve the problem. I'm also one of those people that is like, I'm just going to do it myself. I mean, this was how I got into coding, because I wanted to build an app, and they were like, yeah, that's $100,000 to do that. I was like, coding can't be that hard. I'll just learn, right? So I totally love that you took that growth mindset, approach to it. And I think that that's critical in understanding whether it's trauma you're dealing with, whether it's something you're planning, any of those, it's and in changing the way that your brain is functioning. I think that that's super, super critical. So yeah, I just think that that's awesome. And I would ask, like, is there any other tools or tips that would be something that you would be like, okay, so I did some breathing, or anything that, like, when that comes up, right? Because especially when you're in the trauma, like, I think the human condition is traumatic, to be quite honest. So I think we all, whether it's, in varying degrees, I think some have worse, for sure. I'm not going to negate that. But I think that, when somebody's in that, and one other thing I did want to, before you give me the tools that you would also say, oh no, I lost my train of thought. Give me the tools. Let me hear. What tools would you use?
Maybe I could spark a memory. Yes, there's tools, and this is, I learned as I grow. Some of the tools is most definitely is internalized, is meditation, is bringing that, sitting. One of the biggest things I am now is you need to sit and be still. And I just alluded to this a little while ago. I had a near-death experience, and one of the biggest things that, after that fact is that you're once you have recognized that, and I would consider that part of trauma in my life, because although I thought I believed in it, I didn't, so it took me almost 4 years so through the course of learning the courses that I took is one of the things is one of the biggest things in anything that we do is to sit and be still. You need to find a place, no computer lights, no music, you just need to sit and be still. And whether you believe it's the universe, whether you believe it's God, whether you believe whatever it might be that you believe in, you need to sit and be still with you. And so that you can hear you. There's so much noise in the world, and there's so much angst and kids and just life. And you need to find, and people say, well, go find a happy place. Well, okay, yeah, all right, yeah. That's, if you're angry, and, take 10 seconds but you need to sit somewhere and just be still. I call it, dropping back. I always call it, drop back and punt, because you need to get away from everything and anything. Like at night now, since all this has happened, like at night, most people go to bed at night, and there'll be a clock, maybe, that is an electronic clock, or there'll be an amber light somewhere. There'll be their laptop sitting there with just a little light on the side. That stuff. So you got to be just sitting by yourself, not hearing anything but you, because when you sit by yourself, there will be things that you realize about yourself that you never knew about yourself until you sit by yourself in total silence, And I'm not talking about worrying about where the money's coming from next week. I'm talking about dealing with the trauma, remembering that trauma. And you sit with yourself, there's going to be emotions that come up that you didn't write down on that piece of paper, or there's going to be a feeling that come up that, you know, after that trauma happened and you were talking to a friend and you got angry at the friend for saying something because it was totally different than what you perceived that situation to be. So you need to learn to sit and be still by yourself. And, you know, and with that is meditation. Meditation is a huge practice for healing trauma, number one. The second thing is the grounding yourself. And, you know, Lisa, you know, with the meditation, you learn to push everything aside and ground yourself with what's really important. And what's really important is positive energy. And once you go ahead.
You reminded me too what it was. It was so when we're talking about the idea of
I knew that would happen.
Of them not wanting to process, right? A lot of people being afraid of their feelings and what's going to come up and not wanting to go there. I feel like a lot of times it's actually less painful to walk through it. Like you've already had that, and then you have all this disassociation, and that's actually causing you way more pain and angst in your life than somebody's even aware of, right? So that's why one gets to a state where they're so disassociated that you know, I don't know who I am. Like that it really does happen. I have a friend whose son recently did that and had really bad trauma as a kid, right? So anytime people are worried about processing, I always want to encourage people, like, you've been through the worst part. Now, like, you've been through the thing. Like, now it's just undoing it. And I love that you talked about also releasing it, right? And I love that you talked about, like, you got to get it out. So whether it's, I mean, if you're angry, like my mom is also a trauma therapist, right? So she was like, I don't care if you got to throw ice at the thing, if you got to beat the pillow, but you're going to get it out, right? So it's all about doing that action, right? And it's so much about, we talk about taking action all the time. And I love that that's part of this conversation, right? It's like, yes, okay, trauma happened, that happened. And then the next piece, I think also when we're talking about releasing it, is really identifying like how you can change the story that you made to it, right? Like when the event happened, you came up with a story, you said, this is what happened to me. And then a lot of times that happens to become somebody's identity, but you have the power to absolutely change the meaning of any of any traumatic event, right? And Tony Robbins talks about all the time how, like, even though you had something horrible happen, you still have to be just as grateful for that horrible event, you know? And so it's really being able to shift that mindset. So anybody that's struggling with, you know, feeling like I've got this thing, I know I've got to deal with, I don't want to deal with it, I just encourage you, definitely write it down, definitely take the steps. If you got to reach out to somebody that just to talk it out even, I think that's also, like, there's so much power in your voice, right? And so much power.
You're releasing it. Yeah.
It's
all release steps. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Here's what happens too, what I found out, because now I help people now. I help people, you know, regardless of mastermind and money and all that stuff. It's after near-death experiences. My job here is, you know, not to gouge money. It's to help people. And basically just share love and light and show them that, you know, what they've gone through and how they live. It's all right here. You can change everything in your life just by your thoughts and your words. But I think a lot of people, and most people that I deal with, what happens is over time is they change that trauma story changes so that they can soften that blow and that feeling within inside of themselves. So they, you know, they go through a traumatic experience, and as time goes on, well, you know, they shift that story from the actual reality so that they can deal with life better. And there again, like I said, and you all said that, you know, time heals all wounds. It doesn't, it'll come back. And, you know, some people, and this is what saddens me, is some people take that right on through to their grave because they don't ever get to the point where they recognize that there's an issue, and they just keep reliving it over. And whether it's the same exact trauma, or whether it's manifest in whether their job, they always get fired, or whether their car's always breaking down, or whether they are homeless, or no matter what it is, they've never released the starting point So if they don't go back and recognize that and release that, then they're just, nothing works in their life. And you know, that's heartbreaking to me, because that's not why we're here. And you know, that's why I'm here now, is to help people get through that. So yeah, it's but yeah, it's everything you do, after everything you did that you do, after recognizing and accepting the fact that you had a trauma, and it is a release. Everything you do, I mean, no matter what you do from that point onward, is a release, whether it's writing it down, whether it's recognizing, whether it's meditation, whether you go out with a baseball bat and hit baseballs, whether you get a punching bag and do punching bags, whether you write everything down on a piece of paper and throw it off a bridge. No matter what you do, it's all releasing it. And you know, and I've shared this with Alex, because Alex and I talked, but as you talk, you speak it. As you're writing it down, you speak it. You say, okay, and you hit it right. And what you need to do, and this is key. This is key to healing. Is you need to be thankful. And I know you guys have seen my post. Being thankful and grateful for the worst things in your life is the best thing that you can do. Being thankful and grateful for the worst things that you've gone through in your life is the best thing that you can do. Because if you're thankful and grateful for that stuff right there, then you recognize that there's growing points in your life. And everybody here knows that the worst things you've ever gone through is the lesson in life that was the most impactful in your life. Correct? So you got it. The biggest thing, most people get angry and upset and pissed off. Oh my God, this, oh my God, that. If you walk in thankfulness and gratitude, your whole life will change. Everything in your life will change.
Yeah, for sure.
So go ahead.
Change to, can either not accept it and fight it and make it like the worst thing that ever happened in your life, and that's the reason why my life is this way, versus this is the learning lesson, and I've learned and had so much growth through that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing with trauma is if you don't release it, it will release through illness.
Well, not just illness, but it manifests in many different ways. You know?
Yeah, but a lot of people that get ill and stuff, it's pent up trauma that's coming out.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, their body's
100%.
reacting.
100%.
in the body.
100%.
Yeah.
True. That's you know, that's like a law of gravity. I mean, that's just a universal truth. You hold trauma inside and it's coming out one way or another, whether it's you go insane, whether you get sick, whether it's cancer, right. It doesn't matter. That's somewhere down the road. That's something from your past that's coming out. Some kind of negative energy that's coming out. For sure.
One way or another. Now, do you start to, as you go through it, do you start to like witness the trauma as an observer? No, but I mean, are those the stages, instead of like being full on in it, re-experience, you're like watching it like from a different level as you're observing it, and you're kind of writing it down. Here was what I felt, and you know, as like you're watching.
No, yeah. There's definitely a third person. Yeah, you definitely.
So you move away. So you're not first person, like every full blown into it. You're like, oh yeah, oh look, here's how I felt. Oh, watch. Oh, that happened. Oh, I remember. Yeah. So you start to move away out of the.
Yeah, it's releasing. You're starting to release it.
So you're stepping away from it and watching yourself like observe it.
If you all noticed, when I write posts or when I do videos and stuff, I always say Gary.
So third
I never say me. I never say me. I never say I. You hardly, very rarely see me say that or write that down. It's always Gary. It's always the third person, especially when I'm talking about past feelings and trauma. Yeah, because now it's, you know, that was me now, and that was Gary, and now this is, you know, a whole new spirit. So yes. So, and Lisa was asking, yes, there's more tools. There's, you know, the meditation, and there's what they call grounding, and then there's tapping, where there's certain tapping points on your, you know, on your third eye, and your, you know, on your temple and your heart. And well, there's a lot of them. There's, you know, most people go for the heart because it's the most, either the third eye or the heart, because it's the most sensitive, and that's what brings out the most energy. But yeah, tapping is one of the big things, and which is a huge tool, a huge release. But Another thing is listening to, is a lot of people listen to some kind of soothing music, but there's above and beyond that, there's hertz, there's delta waves and theta waves and beta waves. And those are, they're healing depending on the frequency of those waves, depends on what they affect mentally inside your head. There's studies and studies. I've done, watched charts and watched, videos and and experiments on, they put the caps on and they do the waves and they do the, from people who are going through trauma, and you can see on a graph and a chart, what sections of the brain are being activated, and then what sections, this color does this and this color releases that, and it's just amazing stuff. And again, that's, for people who, thank God I was able to, well, I was able to start dealing with it by myself, but the near-death experience was basically how I came out of it, because I was, my whole life I was being tapped on the shoulder and whispered in my ear, and had many times where I shouldn't even be here. And finally I had to be taken out of here to be, I called having a talking to, like your father would sit you down and say, hey, this is the way it is. Well, I had to be taken out of here to say, hey, you need to wake up, and you're not allowed to stay here, but now so go back and help heal my people. So, that was how I was woken up. But most people need to go to professionals and seek that kind of help. And that's one of the reasons why because all the, excuse my language, shit that I went through in my life, that's why I wanted to learn it myself, so I could help other people. And this was long before I got into Mastermind. I realized all the crap that I went through, that I was able to finally recognize and accept and then release. And but I wanted to learn how to fix people, and so that's why I do what I did. And that's what the courses I took and the lessons I learned. And now I can turn around and help other people, heal from that. And it's a wonderful thing. I mean, not only being able to hear yourself but to see,
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, well, there's a couple things that, I want to touch on as we wrap up. I think this has been an incredible episode, and I hope everyone watching gets so much out of this and really feels the authenticity in this conversation. But one theme that I kind of see recurring in our talk today is an element of taking responsibility for your own healing. You may not have been responsible for what happened, quote unquote, to you, but it is still your responsibility what you choose to do with it after. There's so many people that have gone through things, and I mean, we all have gone through something in our life, but what you choose to do with it is really the difference if you're going to let that run your life, because that's really what's happening. Even if you are choosing to push it down, it's still on some level running your life. And Lisa, I love that you said, if you just stepped through it, it would actually be the less painful alternative to continuing to let it haunt you literally until you're in the grave, which is, what unfortunately happens for a lot of people. And that is really sad to see. So it's almost, again, taking that responsibility for your own healing, even if you didn't choose what happened to you. And the other side of that as well is that, we started to kind of touch on, and it can, I know, be interpreted as quote unquote toxic positivity, because how can you be grateful for something that was unjust or unfair? And there are things that are never going to make sense, why that happened. But at the same time, I was having a conversation not too long ago with a friend, and we were talking about some things and, timelines and things that had happened. And she said, well, if this hadn't happened, then you wouldn't have gone to that place, and you wouldn't have met that person, and then that wouldn't have happened, and then that wouldn't have happened, and you wouldn't be where you are today. And it just it was so simple, but it completely changed how, what, you're right. I never even thought to see it that way. So even though it's yeah, that thing that happened wasn't fair, it wasn't just, and it probably shouldn't have happened. But at the same time, you can't hate what made you you, because all those circumstances, situations in your life brought you to where you are today. And yeah, I love this conversation. Gary, do you have Lisa, go ahead. And Gary, also, do you have any last words of hope for someone that's watching this that could be stepping through this right now?
Yeah, reach out. I mean, if you're not able to do it, like, it takes a strong person to it, and you touched on it. Most people, and I hate saying this, and like I said, it pains me. Most people will take that shit to their grave. They know most people will not. They might recognize that they've been through trauma, but accepting that trauma is the first step to letting it go. And most people will take that to their grave. They won't accept the fact that, my uncle raped me, or that, my kid sister was getting beaten. I had to, take the beating from my father, whatever the trauma might be. And, but they never accept it. And the acceptance is the very first thing that you got to do. But, and again, I'm not anything special. I just, because of the way I was taught and raised, was able to figure out that, I'd rather learn it myself and help somebody else than not. And the words of hope are that, every trauma, in my belief, unless there's just a definite chemical imbalance, and I believe in my heart that can even be healed with enough time and the proper steps without, pharmaceutical medication. I believe that. I don't believe it. I know it. I've already seen, I've already helped people and seen it myself. So no matter what you go through, no matter what kind of trauma is in your heart or in your mind or whatever you're feeling, number one is that you can always be healed. People can always, your brain, unless there's some kind of traumatic brain injury or chemical imbalance that can't be reached through the process of neuroplasticity and those steps, everybody can be healed. You just got to realize that there is an issue. Number two, accept it. And then if you can't handle it yourself, is reach out. There's plenty of people, there's plenty of resources, most of the people, there's somebody around them who loves them and will accept them for no matter what they say or whatever trauma they've been through. It's not ours to judge what you've been through or what happened to you, or even if you did the trauma to yourself to someone else, because I've dealt with people like that too. They're ready to come full circle. This is what I used to do and I can't handle it anymore. It's killing me. And, so there's hope for everyone who has some kind of traumatic thing going on inside the brain can be helped. But you just need to be willing to recognize it and accept it, and then reach out for help or help yourself in some cases, depending on who you are and what and where you want to go with it, so, yeah. So I can't thank you enough. I appreciate y'all. Y'all are doing wonderful stuff. Yeah, you touch my heart. Really, you guys do. I appreciate being here.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah. So
I wanted to wrap up too.
Any last words? Any last words? Any questions?
Well, I wanted to touch on that you talked about neuroplasticity. And so as we're wrapping this up, I really want to talk about the power of the ability for your brain to change. And that it's very good to understand or even know. I think a lot of people just think, oh, I had this, or I'm like this. And there's actually a ridiculous amount of power and ability for your brain. That's what neuroplasticity means. Your brain can actually change. And so there's insane amounts. Yes, it is amazing. We've dealt a lot with this. My significant other I mentioned before is bipolar. So learning how to deal with that and how to change the brain, and really there's a lot of power in that. So anybody that is struggling, whether it's, and also, I mean, even in learning, right? Like I entered college with a 4th grade reading and spelling level, and it's not that. So there's a lot of power in that. So it's just as the last moments of hope that we're talking about on this, and like what's really empowering about this conversation is that yes, trauma can happen. Yes, you can heal from it. And yes, it can change. And yes, your brain can absolutely become healthy.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, our brains, we haven't even tapped into a microcosm of what our brain is capable of. And, once you realize that you can do anything you want, I mean, you can do whatever you want, however you want. All you need to do is train your brain. That's whatever you want to do. You can train your brain. The power of everything is in recognizing, accepting, and then the power of the spoken word and what you put inside. And there's techniques and things that you can do, and 100,000% for sure that you can change your brain in the way it is. And I'm testament to that. I mean, I like you just touched on, I never like, it's funny that now that I'm where I'm at, like it was computers, math, science, and then sports in school, and like English grammar and all that stuff for guys, and now I call it God talk, but I wake up every day and I write stuff out. I don't know where it comes from. I have no idea where it comes from, and this power of the spoken word is key. And that's a release, and it's a release and a technique of learning that that he gave you 2 ears. So when you're speaking it, you're learning twice as much. So yeah, you can most definitely change how your brain from what it was to what you want it to be and where you want it to go. Absolutely, 1,000,000% for sure. So yeah, it's
knowing
good
that
stuff.
keeps you from getting into hopelessness.
Yeah.
To know that you can change versus like, no, I can't change. I'm stuck like this.
Mhm.
Now, we said negative positivity, but is there positive negativity? Because we're all positive that negativity works.
Yeah.
And that's for sure. You tell
How we
yourself
learn.
things and you walk around the house telling yourself, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. Guess what? You're not happy. So why do people get mad if you can't walk around and tell yourself, I'm happy. I'm happy. Okay. Well, I know the other way worked. I can tell you, and nobody's going to argue with you with that one.
Mm-hmm.
But if you tell them the other one, they're going to say, no, you can't do that. That's negative positivity. Well, okay. But I've done the other one and no one's going to argue that doesn't work.
You know what? People will stand around. This is funny. I don't want to keep you there because I know we got to go. But people will stand around and listen to people bitching and pissing and moaning about every little thing. I'm witness to this because everywhere I go, I talk positive. I want to meet people. I want to be positive around everybody. And people back away from that. People are more willing to sit and listen to people bitching and pissing and moaning about how their life is and how it's not working than, hey, I can help you change that. If you just change the way you're talking, just tell yourself that you're happy. Tell yourself that you're going here. Tell yourself you're going to be this way. And people are just like, no, I can't do that. God forbid I'd be positive.
Yeah.
I've had people come back at me for some of the posts that how can you be so positive all the time? You can't walk around and be positive all the time. Well, yeah, I can, because if you're walking around being miserable all the time, I can be polar opposite and be positive all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And people are more willing to sit and listen to people bitching than they are with sitting and willing. And it's the majority. And this is the sad, cold, hard fact about it is that no matter how we try, no matter how much I go out and help as many people as we can, and I'm so thankful for this group right here and for what I'm doing is that the majority of the people are going to take it to their grave. They're going to be miserable to their grave, and it's the way it's going to be. And no matter what we do, and ours is all, and this is the hope message, is you just go out and share your love and your light, and you tell them that there is hope and it's positive, and what they do with that, it's totally their decision.
Exactly.
We have no control over making their decision.
And that goes back to taking personal responsibility, right? So
Absolutely.
It's in each of our hands at the end of the day, what we choose to do with it. If you are just going to take the approach of, this is what happened to me and this is the way I am and it's never going to change, which, that's fair. We can all make our own choices, but that also will affect your life in a multitude of ways, or
everything and
really
everything you do.
Yep. Or
You're
really
giving
doing
your power away. Don't
the
give your power away.
uncomfortable work of digging in deeper and, just going through it and then being on the other side of it. So yeah, I love that. And thank you so much, Gary, for joining us today. This was a great conversation. Much love to you. And
Thank you, guys.
Love you,
everyone listening.
I love
hope
you guys, man. You guys are awesome. Every single one of you. I love you to
Thank
death.
you so much,
You guys are
Gary.
doing good stuff.